And welcome back to KIVUMBI 2022. This is the last hour of the show tonight. And tonight we're tracking President Uhuru Kenyatta's campaign promises and delivery 2013 to 2021. Next year is a general election with 8 months left to the end of President Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy William Ruto's term. They can't do much. So let's set the stage for my discussion. My guests are already seated. I'm speaking to them in a while. So first, there was a target growth that they said that it will be between 7 and 10% in the first 2 years of the Jubilee government. Did it happen? No, it didn't. They also said they were to create 1 million new jobs in the next term. But did they? No, it's not happened. And I'll tell you why. Before we do that, let's look at the GDP growth under the Jubilee government. 2012, 4.6%. That's where Mwai Kibaki left it. But again, you can say he inherited an economy from the former President Daniel Toroitich arap Moi. So 2012, it was at 4.6%. A transition, 2013, 0.7, 0.1 point up. About 2 points up in 2014. And another 1.3 points up in 2015. 2016, we had 0.3 points up also in the growth. Still in 2017, 4.9%. It went down. 2018, it rose once more with about 3 points, with about 2.8 points. 2019, it was 5.0. It went down with 1.3. 2020, 0.3. This is because of the COVID-19. It's understandable, negative 0.3%. 2021, it's 5.7%. But this is a projected growth. Let's look at the other promise. They also promised that they will grow the sector, that's the job sector. And in 2017, what they did was 906, 2018, 824K, 2019, 847.1, 2020, 737.5, and of course this was due to the COVID-19 effect. It went down. Actually, it was negative 737. There was no growth at all in that year because of COVID. And of course, they promised to reduce the public deficit, put more money on services. Did they? The debt to GDP ratio under the Jubilee government in 2013, 44.5%. XN Iraki will tell us what this means. 2014, it was 45.9%. We'll get the translation of these numbers you're seeing tonight. And 2015, it was 50.2%. 2016 was 54.5%, about 4.5% up. In 2017, 56.0, and in 2018, an increase with about 3.3%. All these numbers, you're getting a translation tonight. And 2019, 62.1, further growth. In 2020, last year, for COVID, it was 70.7%. Away from that, the other promise that the Jubilee government, remember, we are just picking major promises that have been speaking about so many times, and because these are things in the campaign trail currently. So they promised to end corruption. And to understand if they ever ended corruption, we look at the TI corruption perception indices of 2020. They say Kenya was 124 out of 180 countries. Kenya was up 4 places. Initially, it was 120 to, and that was 2012. So the measure is from 2012. Still on corruption, the 124 out of 180, but there must be scores. So it was 31 to 100 points, lower than the average of 43 to 100, which was the measure again in 2012. Well, the other promise was access to electricity. This is on the campaign platform now. Everyone talking about it, especially Deputy President William Ruto talking about the electricity connection. In 2013, it was 1,300 megawatts. 2021, increased by 1,300. A good job there that they did. Connections in 2013 was just 2.3 million. Right now, in 2021, is 71% at 8.6 million households. Very good growth over those particular years. So that was what was promised and what was delivered in terms of electricity. The other promise was to increase the spending in education funding by at least 1% every year, and they targeted that by the end of their time it should be at 32%. So in 2015-16 it was 16.7, 26% in 2019-2020, 29.4% between 2020 and 2021. A steady growth, as you can see, from 16 to 29%. Top expensive areas for the government, of course, this is the teachers. The other promise was on teachers. is the salaries for the public university and public primary education. Supporting those three, salaries, public universities and primary education, has been very expensive for the government. That's where they've been spending a lot. And of course, the other promise was to establish a universal single registration. Before I tell you where that is, they of course said that we will unify all this under one card, Huduma number. You remember that? The court stopped it. So the national ID registration, voter registration, National Hospital Insurance Fund was also among them, NSSF, task or even commercial related registrations. All this, they promised that they will be all under one roof. However, Huduma number was introduced in 2018. What happened? The High Court stopped it in October of this year. The reason was that there was no data law, so it was illegal. And away from that, they also promised that they will improve agriculture and productivity. So they said 1 million acres of land will be put under modern irrigation in 5 years. Well, this was a disaster. The multi-billion Galana Kulalu irrigation scheme flopped, and it flopped badly. The reasons: corruption, poor implementation, and all that. Away from that, reduce the cost of credit by at least 50% for the commercial rate. Now, on this, March 2013, 17.73, it's you to judge. March 2017, 4 years later, 13.61, and October 2021, about a month and a half ago, is at 12.12%. It's upon you to judge if it happened. Away from reducing credit, abolish the Kenya Rural Roads Authority and the Kenya Urban Roads Agency. Now, Kera and Kura are still up and running. Did they meet that promise? I doubt. And lastly, they say they'll increase the county allocation from 15% to 40% within 5 years. This is a state. Equitable share of revenue to counties at 2013 was at 15%. The Constitution 2010, equitable share of revenue to counties in 2021 is 32%, falling 8 percentage points below what was projected. So, did they achieve it or not? Very interesting discussion. And let me move now to the table for the discussion tonight. I mean, this is one of the most important topics because you can't move into the future without knowing the past. And Deputy President William Ruto, especially, who is running for president on a ticket that they share with President Uhuru Kenyatta, says that he will only take the credit for the achievements, but for the failures, he leaves it to President Uhuru Kenyatta. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. And XN on the other side, XN Iraki, who is an economist, is joining us virtually from Mombasa. Thank you for joining us. Always a pleasure, Wanjiru Gikonyo, for joining us. Wanjiru is from TISA, the Institute for Social Accountability. A pleasure. And the Javas Bigambo, policy and governance experts, joining me. But first, you have to explain why last week you didn't come for the show.
Last week?
Yeah, I called you and you promised to come for the show. You didn't.
Really?
Welcome, Lucky.
Thank you so much, Ken.
Karibuni sana. Today I'm alone and Kisa Wandera is unwell, so we decided to run the show. The show has to go on. So let's begin with, you have watched, we have only picked 10 areas of the promises that were made by the Jubilee government, and the ones that we think they have achieved, moved a little bit, and the ones that they have done nothing about that still bothers Kenyans. And the fact that this is turning political again, and even Deputy President is running on that. So aside from the 10 that we have picked, perhaps from where you sit, Wanjiru, what did we leave out that perhaps you see the Jubilee government has succeeded in, and the ones that we didn't mention but they totally flopped?
Well, I think you've picked well, and I think it's good to have an evidence-based conversation. The one area where I'd be interested to hear, maybe to talk about is financial inclusion and financial deepening, the use of fintech, the penetration of access to finance through the use of mobile technology. Okay. That seems to have worked well. It didn't start with this administration, but I was looking at some report that was showing there's been a 25% growth in access to financial services through mobile technology. That's a plus.
Was that World Bank report?
Yes,
World
from the
Bank
World Bank
report.
report. Yeah.
Okay, so financial inclusion.
Financial inclusion and financial deepening. Yes.
Deepening. All right, we're going to talk about that. Javas, what areas do you think we left out that we should look into, and perhaps the Jubilee government succeeded or did not succeed at all? They flopped totally.
Well, you see, this is a very broad conversation. And for us to be very clear about what has been left out and what has been included, I think it's important for us to read with a toothpick and do an audit of the Jubilee manifestos or the critical issues, for example, that they promised. At the closure of the first term, what were the limitations and what are the reasons that they did not meet the commitments that they made? Come to the Jubilee manifesto of 2017 to 2018, rather to 2022. What is it that they committed to, and what is it that, as we are moving to the tail end of the administration, that they are struggling with? Of course, as a matter of fact, there are critical policy legislative issues that Jubilee is still tinkering with. We haven't focused, for example, on the fidelity of this administration on critical policies that they themselves propounded, pieces of legislation that they, I think, by way of word of mouth have been committed to, but in terms of practicality, they have eluded, or it has eluded them. So looking at all these things, when you look at the development projects that the Jubilee administration has undertaken, from 2013 up to now, there are certain critical issues. If we're to look at them, even projects, through the lenses of law and policy, and against the backdrop, for example, of the Constitution, then we can say that there are certain successes that we can appreciate, and then there are those that we must call Jubilee for what it is.
Okay, that's what I'm looking at. Identify at least one that they succeeded and you thought I left out in the 10 points, or one that they flopped totally in your mind.
Well, in terms of...
Okay, for me it's the laptop project, so don't mention that one.
Well, that one, of course, outrightly flopped. In terms of successes, remember that after the 4th of March elections in 2013, one of the things that we may want to at least credit Jubilee for, and the leadership of President Kenyatta, is that this is an administration that was taking the reins of power and at the advent of devolution. So there was a question of transferring functions from ministries, departments, and agencies. We have seen that, for example, they had a good intention in the beginning, when the Office of the Attorney General, for example, and the CIC, now defunct, and the Kenya Law Reform, doing an audit of statutes and seeing to what extent they comply with the law and with the national values and principles of governance. There was that, for example, there was in 2013, through session paper number 8 of 2013, when they came up with a policy guideline on national values and good governance. But beyond the creation and adoption of such kind of pathways, you realize that they have done anything but embrace the same.
Okay, okay. Yeah.
I forgot to talk about what was missing.
Can I come back to you so that I get a perspective from XN, who's on virtual, so that he tells us. XN, good evening. From where you sit, what would you say are perhaps the biggest successes of the Jubilee government that we left out in our presentation? And I still ask, the biggest flop from where you sit as an economist? We don't have you sound. Would you please unmute your mic?
Pengine ungetaka niongee Swahili sanifu ambao naifahamu kabisa. But let's talk in English because the program is in English.
Yeah, proceed.
I think there are certain areas of success for Jubilee, but it so happens that we rarely want to say the government has succeeded. We prefer to bash the government. So I think there are certain areas where Jubilee government has done well, and areas where it has not done very, very well. For example, if you look at the GDP growth rate during Jubilee's time, it has been very steady. It has been very consistent. There has not been ups and downs if you compare Kenya in the last 50 years. And I thought that was a plus for Jubilee government to stabilize economic growth. Except for COVID-19, there was very steady growth. Number two, I think Jubilee has done very well on international relations. They have been very good in building networks across East African community, into Congo, into Somalia, and the rest of the world, including China, East and West. And I think that's a positive for Jubilee. And number three, they have been very good on hard issues. The hard issues I'm referring to are things like roads. The road network has done very well. They have done very well on road networks. But the area where they have not done very well, in my opinion, is on issues of corruption. Whether it is real or perceived, most Kenyans don't believe that Jubilee government has done very well in taming corruption. And finally, there's a question on whether the success of Jubilee is really Jubilee or an extension of Kibaki's regime and its economic policies.
Okay. All right, I'm coming back to you. So, Wanjiru, you have an opportunity to talk about the flops.
Yeah. You know, it's easy to say the flops. So if you're measuring from the manifesto,
yes,
you need to start with what was missing in the manifesto. You need to remember that Kenya, as Javas has pointed out, was on a democratic trajectory, fast devolved government, but beyond that it was a new constitution, building up institutions, and this was rooted in Agenda 4. The discussions around Agenda 4, land reforms, electoral reforms, really reforming the key states that underpin the country, the state of the nation of Kenya. And if you look at the manifesto, it looked at development projects at the expense or was silent around these fundamental reforms. So one, we got an administration that came in that was uncomfortable with the constitution from the word go. They came from the no camp and had a mindset geared, one motivation was the ICC, of course. This was unwritten, it again not in the manifesto, but this was really the glue that bound the principles together. And the moment, by the way, they managed to scuttle the ICC, we then saw the Jubilee, as we know it, really fall apart.
Okay.
So what has been missing really is this underlying democratic growth and priorities that the country needs for sustainable development.
Okay.
Right.
Would you say because it's underlying, it wasn't in their manifesto, you can't hold them to account because it was anyway not within what they promised Kenyans?
That's a very good question, and we must hold them to account because we must remember that the fault lines that, you know, the fault lines on which Kenya stands threaten our growth, threaten our cohesion, threaten our nationhood. So if we don't resolve land issues, resettle the landless, and there's been efforts to resettle the landless, but deal primarily with the capture of land, the acquisition of land, you know, some of which, of course, touches on very high political leaders, the First Family, and all of that. Unless we discuss that issue, then we are not really going to make progress. Unless you talk about the independence of institutions, the judiciary, elections, you know, and we've seen really the administration perform really poorly, especially around electoral governance. And this is a major fault line that comes to play when we get into elections. And so, whereas, you know, Professor Iraki talks about some of the gains, my position is that the areas that they have not paid attention to, or the areas that they have undermined, threaten even those gains, because these are the foundational pillars of a successful country.
Okay, Javas.
Well, I agree with Madam Wanjiru here. And when we examine the performance of the Jubilee administration, it must be predicated on the rule of law. And here we're looking at Article 10, Sub-Article 2 of the Constitution that propounds the values of good governance that are there, the rule of law, equity, devolution of power, sustainable development, etc. And all these things are very important. When you listen to President Kenyatta's addresses, special state of the nation addresses, pursuant to Article 132 of the Constitution, you realize that, and one would agree that the president seems to be very keen on his constitutional mandate and the delivery of services. Nonetheless, how come that one would want to indict the president, or rather even point a finger at him for speaking with both sides of his mouth? For instance, when it comes to contempt of court, these are things that are very important in terms of governance. Look at the Miguna matter, for example. How many determinations of the court have been ignored by the Jubilee administration? For example, even starting with the first case, petition number 51 of 2018, EKLR, you realize that Justice Checha Mwita indicted the actions of the Jubilee administration, courtesy of the CS for Interior, we would want to see that a government that seems and intends to commit itself to development and progress under the rule of law should actually have respect for the mandate that it has. Remember that this constitution that the Jubilee administration has to use to deliver its mandate binds everyone who interprets it. When you look at Article 259 of the Constitution, it says that the Constitution must be interpreted in a manner that advances the rule of law, its principles and values. Question arises, if we're to audit the Jubilee administration on its fidelity to the law, would we say that it has done well?
Would you?
The answer is not in the affirmative.
Okay.
When it comes to, Professor Iraki is right to say that at times some people might find it hard to credit the government for its development. Yes, in terms of infrastructure, it has done well. For example, when we're talking about the road from Mulolongo to Westlands, when you talk about the Dongokundu bypasses and all these roads, it has done well. But at what cost? If we're to look at Article 35 of the Constitution on access to the right to information, the issue, for example, of the SGR, why is it that the contract has been hidden 6 feet under?
Okay.
And including other contracts and other details about loans, the people of Kenya have a right to know about this information.
Okay, so for you it's the rule of law. That's a twist that I didn't see coming. But Prof, do you have anything to add on this? Because I want to take you specifically in the numbers now, unless you have something you want to add on the sentiments of both Wanjiru and Javas. I'd like to know specifically about the economy, because it said that the retired President Kibaki left a very good left us at a very good place, but subsequently, in spite of you talking about the GDP growth being consistent in the last 9 years, we are at a bad place. For example, in terms of even the debt, 118% by the time the President Kibaki was leaving, and now over 300 and something percent. So I want to take you through the numbers, but first explain to me how the 2012 transition, we were at 4.6% in terms of the economic growth, and right now we are projecting that by the end of 2021 we will be at 5.7%. So in 2012, 4.6, 2013, 4.7, 14, 6.3. I know you have these figures. 2015, 5.6, and we'll try and put them up on the screen. 2016, 5.9, 2017, down about 10, because that's the election year, 2016-17, right? So down by about 1 percentage point. 2017, 2018, we're back with about 2 percentage points up to 6.3. 2019, 5.0. I don't know why. 2020, because of COVID, we actually went down to 0.3. There was virtually no growth in any sector. And right now we are projecting 5.7. Please break down these numbers by first explaining to us where we were left by the retired president and where we are currently.
I think I put myself in a trap, but I'll address that later on. I think what my two co-panelists are saying and what I'm saying is the same thing. I said Jubilee government has done very well on hard issues, but they have not done very well on soft issues. So if you look at areas that Wanjiru has mentioned, like institution building, areas like judiciary, areas like parliamentary reforms, areas like electoral reforms, Jubilee has not done very well. But when you look at things that you can see, like roads, highways, ports, and so on, they have done very well. Yet the two areas are connected. You cannot do well in one area without doing the other. And she is right that each is a foundation of the other. You can have very good highways, very good roads, very good schools, but if there's no rule of law, if people don't respect institutions, then you get yourself in trouble. In fact, if you remember when we had post-election polls in 2007, 2008, it happened when the economy was doing very well. And that is the danger of focusing on the hard issues and then neglecting the soft issues. And the soft issues are always addressed by building institutions. And that's what the new constitution was trying to focus on. Can we build institutions? Can we make institutions strong? And if you look at the proposals in BBI, my observation seems to indicate that they are trying to roll back some of the gains of the new constitution. So I'm not in any way contradicting what the two panelists are saying. I'm just supporting what they are saying. Now let me go back to your question. What is happening to the economy? I think the Jubilee government was able to stabilize the economy, but they never brought any dramatic growth. It is like we have been landing on a flat ground, but we have not gone up a steep or gone down a steep. So what we would have expected from Jubilee government manifesto is some dramatic growth. Because if we at least something like 80% during Kibaki era, we would have expected Jubilee government to reach something like 10% or 12%, or the 10% that is projected by Vision 2030. So in my opinion, they have tried to build on Kibaki legacy, but they would have done better, and we expected them to do better than they did.
I think Wanjiru can chime in here.
Yes, agreeing in part with Professor Iraki, but disagreeing that they've done well on hard issues, because their infrastructure investments, as Jabba said, have had major governance gaps. In fact, we have a government that is very populist, has tried to do too much, has done, a lot of projects all over with a lot of corruption, very high cost, borrowed expensively, very inefficient. So at the end of the day, there's a story that those GDP figures aren't telling us. And the story is, are Kenyans feeling this growth? Is this growth translating into jobs, into good quality jobs? Is where this money was put into the SGR, into, like we're talking about the Galana, yes, project, these massive projects, looking at the dams and the billions lost there. So there's, when you look at the infrastructure investments, you have to look at the underlying. So unfortunately, the failure to pay attention to soft issues has also undermined the infrastructure development. And this infrastructure development has become a trap for us, because now we're in a debt trap. The administration is not able to spend on social services as they had projected to do. They are forced to keep cutting. They are not able to spend on education. I hadn't realized they had offered to take education up to 32%.
Yes.
Now, education has been growing, but the last 2 years, they've had to cut back. They've even cut back on tertiary education. This is, how do you grow a country and not invest in tertiary education? Students were unable to enroll for university courses they had qualified for, because help has been cut and university fees has increased. So this government has driven itself into a debt trap because of budgeted corruption. And several of these infrastructure projects are not, do not give a return. So not only are they expensive, they then don't have the return. So I think really the story of Jubilee administration is they have been very reckless. They have also been very dysfunctional, because, like I said, after the achieving the ICC win, there was then a political fallout between the principals. There was no ideological vision for the country that they wanted to deliver.
Okay.
So they then moved into their own self-interest, and we are the fallout.
That's what you blame for the non-implementation of some of these promises that were made, because there is a school of thought that while they calculated how they would win the election, they didn't calculate how they would govern. So that was the pitfall at that time.
You have actually said it.
Okay.
Because I think they were playing this game, a moment at a time.
Yeah.
Took over. Really, Kenya is a very sophisticated economy, sophisticated democratic process, country, sophisticated political process that needs a lot of attention, that needs unified focus.
Okay.
And they have not had that. So really, the Jubilee administration has been quite shambolic.
Okay.
But despite being shambolic, there are some small wins that have happened, and I agree with Professor Iraki.
Yes.
A lot of those are the foundations that were laid by the NAC administration, the Kibaki administration, that they have
actually it was a question rather than a statement from Prof, because he said sometimes we need to examine it in terms of, is it a continuation of what President Kibaki, Prime Minister Raila Odinga and Vice President Kalonzo Musyoka began doing, or it's entirely new, because that's also a way of measuring the success.
Huduma number the Huduma centers particularly were a brainchild of the NAC administration. If you look at the ICT revolution, again, Professor Bitange Demo, Dr. Bitange Demo, you know, that plan and the laying of the fiber optic cable, you know, is rooted in that. So there are some things they inherited. Ironically, even with devolution, which this government has fought tooth and nail, but of course, because we have a strong constitution, they haven't been unable to unroot it. We have a strong judiciary that has fought back. Devolution has served this administration very well.
Okay.
They improve some of these, the mileage laid down in terms of the roads, the growth in the agricultural sector, even the improvements in the health sector are in devolved sectors. So this administration has benefited where it hasn't reaped.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Well, where it hasn't sown. So it has reaped where it hasn't sown.
Where it did so.
Despite itself.
But although you would argue that President Uhuru Kenyatta was part of that government, right, as a deputy prime minister, so they were part of it. But anyway, Javas.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I was part of it also.
Well, you see, each government will always build on the successes of the previous government. Today, the government that will come after the Jubilee administration will also, in some way, create its own new programs, but at times it will also have to hitch its other programs on the existing programs under this administration. But can we look at the problem in the eye, our governance in the eye? And for instance, there is the land question that Madam Wanjiru here spoke about. Look, is it possible that if we were to sort out the land question in this country, we would do much better for the people, and the people do much better for themselves than what this government has done?
The president says he has issued title deeds, triple what his two predecessors did.
Title deeds?
Yes, he says
title deeds? Title deeds, yes. But let's start from somewhere here, Ken. The TGRC report.
Was it ever implemented fully?
That is
Not just implemented fully. Has there been any interest to implement it?
Okay.
Have they turned a single page of that report?
Okay.
The answer is in the negative. This administration has not had sufficient political goodwill to touch on the TGRC report. In fact, we can say that we have had 10 wasted years to run the course of serious progress in the land sector. And you know very well that Kenya's economy runs so much on land. So the moment we screw up land, we are screwing up the economy.
Yeah.
So we can say that this administration has, in a way, instrumentalized the failure of the growth of the economy by way of sitting on its own hands.
Okay.
The other issue, for example, look at some of the critical failures. Yes, there is corruption. In the first administration, in the first term of the Jubilee administration, there were serious corruption cases. NOA Scandal 1 and Scandal 2, they were there. Come to the second term, we've had the KEMSA scandal, for example, and they remain unresolved largely.
Okay.
Then there is the issue of the scandal of the mobile clinics. They are rotting, having cost billions of shillings of the taxpayer.
And big.
Yes, billions of shillings. That money would have done much better. And the persons who are behind all these scandals are walking scot-free on the streets of Nairobi and
So
elsewhere.
that's a complete failure.
No, not only is scot-free, some have been redeployed
Yes.
in other ministries and had scandals in those ministries and been redeployed again.
KEMSA.
Yes.
And if you're very fortunate, you might get an ambassadorship after you've done all this. Where?
So let me tell you the note here.
Yes.
I'm not saying that we have failed flat, for example, in the health sector. Look at, for example, the president's efforts when it comes to universal health care. I think it's commendable,
Yes.
but we're still lagging behind. We have not even achieved maybe that which they had intended. Look at the pilot projects. If we're to look at the counties that they piloted the UHC, are we seeing serious successes right now across the entire county? No. But there were some good efforts. Somewhere the ball was lost.
Okay. Excellent.
Can I?
Okay.
UHC.
Yeah.
Like you say, excellent idea. But very characteristic of this administration, a populist administration that also has a lot of political baggage, political interest baggage. So they are very spread thin. UHC has some fundamental gaps. To implement it properly, the investment needed would have been more than what was put in.
Okay.
Also, the government would have needed to put in a lot of investment at the very local level, which means that 40% to the county needed to have gone hand in hand with the UHC.
Right.
So in one hand, they are holding back the levers that would make their own project successful. So this lack of unity in terms of their vision, where they are talking out both sides, really, it cuts across.
Prof, I know you want to join this conversation, especially on where Javas has left it.
I actually feel that I've been directed in this conversation, but let me get back. I think the issue we are raising here is very simple: that the economy has grown, but have we had inclusiveness? Have we had equality? So the economy has grown, but some people seem to have benefited more than the others, and I think that is what is creating a lot of dissatisfaction. Number two, on devolution, I think we have emphasized or put too much effort on sharing the money, not generating it. And 10 years after the Constitution, we should be asking how many counties can sustain themselves? How many counties can run their programs without depending on the government? And another key issue in devolution that we are neglecting, which is of a great concern to me, is that the rest of the world is talking about globalization despite COVID. We are talking about East African community. We are talking about African free trade area. But in Kenya, we are too tied to counties that we are neglecting opportunities we can exploit by looking outside. And finally, I think we should also need to recommend Jubilee government for thinking about the disadvantaged. For example, giving stipend to the elderly. I think it was small, but that's a step in the right direction. That is my view.
Okay. Prof, perhaps before I come to Javas, on legislation, I just want to touch. What would you say about what they've done with the legislation? Is Jubilee government leaving us with some laws that are for posterity, or there are laws that you think when we have a new government, most of them are going to be turned and done away with, or they're going to seek amendments? So on legislation, your take?
I think if you listen to the president's speech yesterday and the one he made the previous national holiday, I think it was Mashujaa Day, he is very consistent. He has consistently talked about BBI being revisited. What is not clear is what does that revisiting mean? I did some homework and read through BBI, the revised version, all of them, I read them through. I looked at the economic and political part of it. And I think there's some hangover from the KANU days, from the past experience, that the new constitution changed things too much, and we need to slow down.
Okay.
So I'm fearing that the next regime may try to roll back some of those political and constitutional gains. But luckily, it seems that the public opinion and most serious people in this country seem to believe that we cannot improve on what we have, nor do away with what we have. They are very good constitutional safeguards. So I don't think the new registrations will fundamentally change our constitutional order so much that we shall go back to the old order. I think we can't go back there.
Jefferson, even as you speak, you respond to what you wanted to say earlier. Perhaps you also need to touch on legislation, because one of the areas that they talk about is the security laws as was a setback. And it was used to remember Senator Orengo when he was meeting before the Senate, when he said that regimes will come back and eat their own children. It was in reference to that. So perhaps
well, first on the issue of taking care of the disadvantaged, the old, etc. I think yes, it's a good thing. But to what extent have we also seen this administration taking care of the interests of the disabled and other so much disadvantaged persons? For example, just the other day, the president addressed the nation and he gave a remarkable display of the successes of his administration. But look, how many blind people or people who needed to access the speech of the president in Braille have read that speech, gone through that speech? In terms of voting, for example, the other thing, why can't we see even the Jubilee administration, or any administration for that matter, taking interest of voters who are blind? We have not made strides in that effort, yet we've talked about this thing time and again. So we are disenfranchising them. When it comes to motor security laws, it is easy to come to a near conclusion that, for example, even in the first term, the laws were being made for other people and not for the greater good. For example, if laws are supposed to constrict the spaces and operations, then those laws do not serve the greater good of the individual. Let me give this example. On the 3rd of November 2016, there was a demonstration by CSOs, and it was curtailed by the state machinery under the guise that the CSOs that were under that demo, organizing that demo, were financing some terror groups. Today, as we sit here, the CSOs are operating in a constricted space. The space has so much shrunk to the extent that from 2014, the first president's speech on the state of the nation, to this day, we have not seen any robust engagement or response to the president's speeches by CSOs or even by non-state actors, because people fear what will happen next.
Yeah.
In fact, the space even for criticizing government. The other thing is that enforced disappearances. Today, how many people have disappeared and no one in the government is willing to be held to account or to handle this matter? The government should be held to account, because they are citizens. Who is supposed to protect the citizens? So if at all we were just to look at the issues of human rights and enforced disappearances, would we say the Jubilee administration has done well?
Okay.
The answer is not positive.
Okay. Okay. Wanjiru.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is very much in line with the nature of this administration. And when I talk about this administration, I talk about the two principals. Two principals who voted no, voted against this constitution, voted against the majority aspirations of Kenyans, as it turned out, and of course have then gone on to be very uncomfortable with the constitution of Kenya. So it's no surprise then that in the way they have executed their mandate, they have clamped down on the civil society space. Not only clamped down on the civil society space, but what you find is that our constitution vests sovereignty in the people of Kenya, Article 1. Government is supposed to transact its business with the full inclusion of the people through various processes. This administration does public participation, but does it in a very tokenistic manner, so that even citizen voice has been curtailed. And to the extent to which they have not supported and built up the role of civil society, they continue to curtail citizen voice. And how does this play out? Apart from the violation to the constitution, if you look at what happened last year when we had the COVID outbreak, and the government then had to curb down on movement, and they did so with a very heavy hand. Did so in violation of human rights, did so in a manner actually that caused Kenyans to rebel against even the positive dictates of needing to confine themselves to prevent the spread of the COVID virus, of the pandemic. So what you see is an administration that's uncomfortable with the sovereignty of people, that is not people-centered. And so this curbing down on democratic rights emanates from that. Now, the unfortunate part is that as Kenyans, we haven't fully embraced the need to fight for our democracy. And so if the next administration comes and continues this trajectory of undermining our governance institutions and our democratic gains, we may face reversals, because in these 10 years, we've been saved a lot by the judiciary. We've been also saved a lot by cases that civil society has continuously taken to court, right? But can we stand another onslaught like this? Do we have what it takes?
Now that we don't know who will be in office after the next administration takes over.
Just a bit now. When it comes to education, we can say that Jubilee has done fairly well in terms of insisting on 100% transition rates.
Even though they don't put money in it.
Exactly. So in terms of policy framework for transition in education, I think credit goes to Jubilee administration. It is very good, because when we increase our literacy levels, then also it's easy to govern the people that are self-aware and conscious. But when you also come to infrastructure development in schools, you will agree with me that if you take a stock check across the 47 counties, county governments have invested so much in infrastructure in primary schools and secondary schools, though it's not their function, than the national government. In fact, there are some areas where county governments have even started and financed the cropping up of new schools that never existed to reduce the distance that people have to cover to go to school.
Okay.
So I think here what we need to see is proper support for county governments by the next government. We need to see enhanced intergovernmental relations. For example, if we've got other institutions such as Intergovernmental Budget and Economic Council, IBEX there, the summit is there, and yet you see even the chair of the Council of Governors begging through the press to have the share to county governments disbursed in good time by the National Treasury. Or in fact, even today by law, it's the president who is supposed to summon the summit, and it's not a mandate that is shared between him and the chair of the Council of Governors. So which means the summit will be called at the pleasure of the president.
Okay. So that's
or even IBEC, for example.
Okay.
Why is it that county governments are struggling with matters of revenue and no ministry at the national level is struggling with the same? So here also demonstrates the lack of sufficient goodwill to make sure that the wheels of devolution run properly.
Okay, okay. That brings me to the question of now the public debt, because this is a big thing. And Prof, I'll begin with you on this. If you look at the figures also from 2013 to 2020, if you look at where retired Mwai Kibaki left it in 2012, your perspective on this and the reason why we are where we are, were we too ambitious? There was nothing to learn from? What happened? How did we get from 44% to 70%?
Is that question for me or for who? Ken, is that question for me?
Yes, yes, that's your question.
Yes, before I go to that, I need to respond to what Wanjiru said for a few minutes.
Okay, please.
Why the democratic space is being taken away? It's very simple. We no longer have any opposition in parliament. So if there's no opposition in parliament, what do you expect to happen to our rights? Number two, if you look at the big jobs in the government and other sectors, a lot of civil societies have been co-opted. So do you expect them to talk too loudly against the government? And very important, most citizens in this country believe that their voice does not matter. The major decisions are made in the boardroom. And finally, it was obvious, not just in Kenya but worldwide, that the government would exploit COVID-19 to amass more power. And it's going to be very hard for the government to release that power even when COVID goes. So the civil society, the people who believe in human rights and so on, have a lot of work cut for them. Now to your question, how do we move from 45% of the GDP to 70% of the GDP in terms of debt? I think it's simple. A lot of the projects that we have carried out in the last 10 years or so have been financed by debt. And that is why everybody's talking about debt. Now the alternative to debt would have been raising the taxes. It's not that easy because Kenya has a very large informal sector which becomes very hard to tax. So the easiest way to get money to finance our infrastructure, our development, has been through debt. And debt is very sweet because you can pass it over to the next generation. But if you start saying that we are going to tax people, the political implications are obvious. You might end up losing votes. So the next regime, whoever is going to be the next president, have to deal with the issue of debt. How do we make our debt sustainable? How do we rely less on debt? And we probably put more money or get more money through tax, or we reduce waste, or what Kenyans refer to as corruption. I think we got there because we are probably more ambitious and we don't think much about the source of financing for projects. I think that's how we got there, but we can get out of that.
Okay, that's fairly said. Wanjiru.
Well, I think there's a bit more to it than that, because what has happened is our debt problem, and I've said this before, I think I said it on this program, has become an economic problem. So we have a debt crisis that's become an economic crisis because the factors that have driven that debt have gone on to compound it. Number one, the debt is based on projects and agreements that were irresponsible, don't have the returns. We've then gotten into contracts around that. We borrowed expensively. So the commitments that the government has that they need to deal with are not going to be based on the ability of those investments to return revenue. We also have structural problems. We've talked about land. the failure to deal with those historical issues that can unlock the revenue that needs to come from land. As a result, we tax income. We don't tax wealth. So a lot of people holding land are not then contributing in a commensurate manner. Okay. So even when you talk about counties' own source revenue, until we do the land reforms that we need, until we deal with the historical injustices and the historical issues around land, not just digitization, because that's good, that's a good governance aspect. Of course, it doesn't deal with the land grabbing that has taken place because of the opacity around land. Until you deal with those historical issues, you're not also going to be able to generate the revenue that you need in a just manner. Okay. Apart from that, the policies that the government has employed to deal with the debt crisis, the monetary policies, are then also not working. Okay. So that you have a country that we have falling foreign direct investment, we have falling competitiveness in the regional market. Okay. So that we are, it's not just dealing with debt. We actually need to look at this problem holistically. Okay. We need an economic rescue program, and the economic recovery program that the government set up in 2020 doesn't deal with these fundamental issues. Okay. The last reason why we have this economic crisis is that the debt crisis was precipitated by budgeted corruption, and those budgeted corruption projects are in the budget. Even if you look at the budget this year, by the way, it's very stark. You look at infrastructure investments getting up to something like, is it 27%? Really, really high amounts going into energy and infrastructure projects. You see the allocations to health as a percentage going down, agriculture going down, education going down.
Infrastructure?
Yes. Infrastructure going up, of course, debt repayments, recurrent expenditure going up. So this budgeted corruption has refused to move. How are we going to unlock that? And linked to that, when you look at, for instance, high energy costs that have made production in Kenya very uncompetitive. We saw again in today's newspapers that the investors around the power generation have refused to have closed the space so that government can then not renegotiate and reduce the cost of electricity to Kenya. So we've got structural problems that this administration has not dealt with. So they've created others. Falling on the next administration, are they going to have the courage to make the hard decisions?
All right, Javas, on debt, as you close, and I'd really want you, all of you, to grade Jubilee. If you were to grade their performance versus their failure, what would you? So, as we close the show, perhaps...
Well, first, we need an economic parachute.
Yes.
Because we're in a bad situation. And we are trying to live beyond our means. First of all, our budget is financed by external parties.
Just a portion of it, though.
Yes, and then in terms of our development, like look at what kind of revenue do we raise here to finance our budget. It's not even 50%.
Because they're taxing income.
Exactly. The other thing is that while it's good to invest in all these infrastructure programs, I think it's also very good to ensure that we live within our means. And our progress must not be forced, because we are not dying tomorrow. We need to have it gradual in such a manner that people are kept alive. Today, if we're to analyze or look at the poverty index from the time Kibaki left power and the time Jubilee is leaving power, are people richer or poorer in comparison? Okay. The better angels of the governance of Kenya will be those leaders who occupy office but pay fidelity to the law, do not struggle to get or to borrow, and don't want to be held to account and then sink in corruption, and don't want to be questioned. Because today, and we've even seen the reports, that during the COVID year 2020, up to now, the money that has been borrowed under the auspices of COVID, loans, etc., nobody's willing to talk about them. Nobody's putting the papers on the table. So I think we need to find ourselves in a space of transparency and accountability in terms of government. If I were to rate, as you properly asked, this government in terms of its scoring, 1 out of 10, I think I would give Jubilee maybe 5.2.
5.2. Okay, Prof, how would you rate, as we close, how would you rate the performance of the Jubilee government?
I think, Ken, that is a very unusual question because that is what I do for a living. I'm always examining students, giving them grades. So I would like to be as objective as I can. I don't know whether I'm supposed to examine Jubilee as an internal examiner or an external examiner, but I'll just be an examiner. I think before I answer that question, I think we need to ask a very basic question when we are grading Jubilee. We are talking as elites or intellectuals at this level. But when you go to the grassroots, I think the question everybody is asking is, do I have money in the pocket? If you ask people whether Jubilee has done well or not, that's the question they ask you. Do I have money in the pocket? Do I have more money in the pocket? And they can also ask another question. Do I have an opportunity to put more money in the pocket? And even when we get the next government, people will ask the same questions. Can I get more money in the pocket? If I were to give Jubilee a grade very fairly, very objectively, I would give them a passing grade of 6.5 out of 10, okay, or 65%.
65%. And finally, Wanjiru, how would you grade? We have to close.
Generous. I would be those ones that would say the student did not understand the question, has answered wrongly. Yes.
They set their own question.
They set their own question. Completely.
Zero.
That's where I'd be. And I just want to leave a thought,
yes,
because we're looking at the budget process right now. The BPS is being discussed. And when you look at the corruption that took place last year, 7.7 billion of COVID funds unaccounted for by counties could have been used to establish a vaccine manufacturing facility in Kenya. Yet in this year's budget, we have an allocation for a vaccine facility. The 7.8 billion misappropriated by KEMSA would have been enough to purchase 52,000 ICU beds.
Okay.
So as the Jubilee administration seeks to wind up, we need to hold it to account for the money lost during this regime. Okay. And as Kenyans, we keep sweeping these things aside and looking forward as though we have an endless pot of money, but really we know there isn't, because the taxes that are falling on us are because of these leakages.
Okay.
Yes.
Were you grading?
Yes. Student needs to repeat.
All right. That's a complete failure. Complete failure.
F minus. There is.
Thank you very much. I'll not grade the Jubilee government. I have to remain objective. Yes. Thank you, Wanjiru Gikonyo, for coming for the show tonight. And this is the second last show on KIVUMBI 2022. I'm glad to host you once more here because we need to go for Christmas. Javas Bigambo, thank you very much. And Dr. XN Iraki, thank you so much for joining us virtually from Mombasa. My name is Ken Mijungu. Thank you. Yeah, we see you. Thank you for watching KIVUMBI 2022 tonight. And of course, next week, our last show, look out for more insight on what matters as we head into the election. 6.5, 5.2, and complete failure. A good place to live it tonight. Have a good night and God bless.